Welcome, my friends, to the Bob and Brad podcast. My name is Mike Keenitz, and today I'm interviewing Caley and Michelle, who are the authors of Indoor Rowing. This book can be found on Amazon or also at Human Kinetics website. We will link down below. But we are going to talk about the benefits of doing indoor rowing, some ways to structure your workouts, as well as some stretches and other strengthening routines that work well with rowing. So I actually learned a lot because I don't do a lot of indoor rowing, pretty much none. So it was a learning experience for me as well. So without further ado, here is Caley and Michelle. Well, welcome to the podcast, Michelle and Caley. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
So today we are talking about the book you two authored together called Indoor Rowing. And the first question I have for you two is, can you share a bit about your backgrounds and what led you to do a book on this?
Caley, I'll take it. Yeah. Michelle and I both worked for a really large and fast growing boutique fitness concept that was all based around rowing. So it was rowing based indoor fitness. And, we both come from different backgrounds, but it led us to rowing. And we had worked with probably, I don't know, Michelle, 10,000, maybe more, probably more clients just over the years, introducing them to the rower, many of which had never rowed before and really were not active in fitness at all. They were kind of brand new to fitness. Some of them were people that had rowed before, but maybe didn't learn the proper form and weren't really maximizing their benefits from the machine. So we kind of came together and thought maybe we should scale this and maybe we should put some education out there for people that maybe are too scared to go into the gym. We were seeing a lot of the same common mistakes through the people that we were working with. So we thought that there might be more people out there that would like to kind of learn about the rower to a degree that, more than they might be getting with their coaching that they're getting at whatever studio they're at or whatever they're finding online.
Sure. My apologies to anyone that saw my weird face. My screen went black for a second there, but it's back. Michelle, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that Caley pretty much summed it up really well. It just became a part of my life, and I know Caley's life over the last 9 years, and it's just been we've both taken the opportunity to get coached on the water. We've both taken the opportunity to really just dive in head first into the rower. So wanted to share that with everyone because I am, in the later years in my life, I'm going to be 55 this year, and I have an opportunity to use rowing to really get me and keep me in tip-top shape. So wanted to share that with everyone.
So do either of you do like outdoor rowing too, or just indoor?
Yeah. Yes, we both, I don't know about you, Michelle, since starting in the indoor rowing space, I've then gone outdoor. Michelle, was yours the same order as well? Yes. Were you indoor first? Yes. Yeah. So like I mentioned, and like Michelle mentioned, we've been in the indoor space for a while. And for us, it was really important to not just get the experience of being on an erg or on an indoor rower, but also take that experience outside and learn what the differences are, so that we can speak the language and coach those types of clients as well. But then also just get to know the sport a little bit more and what might be transferable on water versus just on a rowing machine.
So so the audience knows, I've used an indoor rower probably a handful of times, so I at least have a little experience, but I have a kayak and a paddleboard, and my family does canoeing, but I've never done like outdoor rowing. So this is going to be a learning experience for me.
Awesome. Glad we can be a part of that.
Yeah.
So what really inspired you to write the book, and how does it stand out from other fitness books?
I think, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I think the big thing was Michelle and I working with so many clients day in and day out, and we would travel around to different studios around the country and work with, hundreds per weekend, hundreds of people coming in. Again, some that had rowed before in other fitness environments, and then some that had never rowed before. And yeah, we just really started to see, wow, there's only a number of mistakes that most people make, and they all make these same mistakes. And how do we scale that? And then, I think what makes it different is that expertise, right? That experience, having worked with so many different people from so many different backgrounds. Again, some were like, deconditioned, did not come from we're not working out for the last 5 to 15 years. And then others were coming from, a fitness background, a CrossFit background, or, were super comfortable moving their body. And maybe just didn't have the training on the rower, the coaching that they needed on the erg. So I think that experience alone definitely sets it apart. What about you, Michelle? Anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that bringing it into layman's terms, I think that's one of the hardest things. When you have when you understand something so intricately, you have a tendency to speak to it sort of at a higher level. And I feel like people who are coming in, the general population, the rower's been used in a really aggressive way, right? And I think that a lot of people don't understand it. So the book is written in a way that allows them to understand the rower and how the rower you can really use it to access. I actually teach still an indoor rowing class. And I always say to my people, if you can learn to work with the machine, it'll work with you instead of working against you. So it makes rowing more enjoyable, which is something that we want, because if people enjoy it, they'll do it more. And when they do it more, they feel healthier.
I know rowing's been around for a long time, but I feel like the popularity kind of came when CrossFit boomed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so. The first kind of indoor rowing specific studios really started mostly in New York around 2014. That was about the time, which is a little after the CrossFit boom. But I think and most CrossFit affiliates and gyms use the Concept 2 rower. So that was what Michelle and I are most familiar with. But I would say CrossFit for sure.
Sure. So, what makes rowing such a great workout, especially, we'll just say for people over 50, because most of our audience that listens to this is over 50.
Michelle, I'll let you take this one.
On this one, right? Just a little color on that question. I just recently did, my annual physical, and I went to the doctor, and he did the whole blood pressure and heart rate thing. And he said to me, "Man, are you still rowing?" And I said, "I am." "Why?" And he said, "Because your heart rate it was like 41. It was in the low 40s.
Yeah, that's pretty low.
And I said, "Oh, that's awesome. And your blood pressure is really great." And then I went and did my blood work for my physical. And I went in to read the doctor's notes on my blood work, and his RX at the bottom of it, after he read through everything, his prescription was just keep rowing. And I was like, yeah, that's awesome, right? So what I think makes rowing such a great workout for people my age, over 50, it's low impact, it's full body, it improves the cardiovascular system, it builds strength, it builds endurance, it's gentle on the joints, right? And it meets you where you are. So there's some days where you wake up and you're just like, man, I just don't have it. Not today. I'm tired. My joints hurt. And you can go in and you can work with the rower, and it delivers what you need, because you're basically telling it what you need. Because the rower is an effort-based machine. The harder you push it, the harder it pushes you back, right? So I think that that's one of the things. The low impact nature keeps it easy on the joints, right? There's so many big benefits, and I think we're going to talk about them later, but I think that for somebody over 50, there's so many things that happen: muscle loss, not just muscle loss, but strength loss, immobility, cognitive decline. There's so many things that rowing can speak to for somebody that's in that stage of their life. I think that's what makes it such a great workout.
Sure. Yeah, when I think of I don't know, probably because I've always seen CrossFit, I always just think younger people doing it. But I think I could see how it's really great, because it's a really low impact exercise that most people can do. And how would you say it compares to other things that are low impact, like cycling or swimming? What kind of makes it different?
I think the biggest thing is muscle engagement. So with cycling, just to start on that, you're working mostly your legs and your core, and with rowing, it's full body, right? So all the major muscle groups, similar to swimming. I think it's definitely similar to swimming in that, although swimming potentially is just less accessible to people. But yeah, I think more muscles at once, right? And that has an effect on your cardiovascular as well when you're recruiting all of those muscles together. It's low impact like the others as well. It's non-weight bearing, which is important for anybody that does bear quite a bit of weight. Anything to add, Michelle?
Nope, covered it all.
Nailed it. I'm pretty impressed by your. What was your heart rate at? 40 something?
41.
Jeez. I
She's
mean,
a beast.
I've done numerous marathons, and mine's like 53. So
Cardiovascular capacity that you build on the rower is probably the very first thing you're going to see. So people always think like weight loss or whatever, but your cardiovascular capacity expands so quickly on the rower because you are engaging so many muscles, and your heart has to pump harder to get the oxygen to those muscles, right? So your capacity grows quickly on the rower. I mean, within 2 weeks, if you're using it right, you're going to be able to start to see results.
sure, I must have been using it wrong, I guess, or just not enough. I didn't do it that frequently.
Based on Michelle and I's experience with clients, there's a good chance your form, could use some improvements.
Yeah, probably. So, what are the biggest misconceptions people have about rowing?
Too easy, too hard. It's all up and down.
It hurts my back. I can't do it. It hurts my back. Yeah. Then there's ways to get around that, right? Too easy, too hard, I think is like what I said earlier. It's an effort-based machine. So it's just learning how to use it. You can modify or moderate your intensity based on what you want. Do you want it to be easier? Do you want it to be harder? If you know how to make it harder, you can make it harder. If you don't know how to use the machine, you're probably thinking it is too hard because your heart rate is thumping and your breath is so heavy that you can't get comfortable in the stroke. There is a way that you use the machine, the proper way, that you can actually fall into a really solid rhythm and get comfortable in the stroke, right? So that too easy, too hard is something that you learn to modify or moderate. Upper body and hurts my back. Caley, do you want to dive into those?
Yeah, upper body. I think it comes from people watching rowing. So they see it, and so they think, or they just associate it with like a rowboat using your arms, right? Where in the sport of rowing and rowing indoor on an erg or a rowing machine, you're using mostly your legs. So it's legs, core, and arms. It's like roughly 60%, it all depends on your body, but roughly 60% of the power that you're creating is coming from your legs. So I think a lot of that is just the visual of it, people seeing it or associating it with kayaking or canoeing, right? Things that are just really using upper body. And then hurts my back. Yeah, I think, again, that just goes back to people not activating the right muscles when they row, not having their body in the right position. Potentially, if you're getting on and you haven't really learned proper form and you're just sprinting and you're just going all out, yeah, that probably wouldn't feel great. Same thing if you just, don't know how to deadlift and you go pick up a bar 20 times, right? It probably doesn't feel great. So I think a lot of that is just learning the proper form and recruiting the right muscles, engaging the core. Rowing actually should be very good for your back if you're rowing properly. So that's definitely a misconception.
Yeah, I'd imagine. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay. I think a lot of it hurts my lower back. I think a lot of people don't really differentiate between pain and discomfort or pain and like muscle fatigue. And a lot of people will feel the muscle fatigue in their back because they're using their back to stabilize throughout the stroke. So their back is actually fatiguing. Like if you were in a plank and you held a plank for 45 minutes, your stomach would start to burn. And I think a lot of people feel that fatigue, and they dissociate that with, or they associate that with back pain.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just people go too hard, too fast, or too much. Like the only time I ever used rowing was like I did a warm up and then I do like intervals. But I think just having a pre-planned like what that workout is going to be and be tailored is going to be a lot more beneficial than just kind of winging it.
Yes.
Any
Agreed.
Yes.
Okay.
All across the board.
I know we're going to get into this in more questions later. So next question is, how does rowing support joint health? I know we talked it's low impact because obviously you're not running or jumping. And how can it help prevent common age-related issues?
I'll jump on this one again, Caley. So yes, it is low impact. So it's easy on the joints. But let's talk about the muscles around the joints, the muscles that support the joints, right? So because it is so leg intense and core intense, you're going to have the muscles in the core, you're going to have the muscles in the legs, which support the hips, the knees, and the ankles getting stronger, right? So it's going to strengthen those muscles. It's going to promote that full range of motion, because you're going to go from triple flexion, so where your ankles are flexed, your knees are flexed, and your hips are flexed, into almost complete triple extension. So your hips open, your knees open, and your ankles drop, right? So it improves flexibility and it keeps that fluidity in your joints. Talked about it a little earlier that, you know, as you age, you lose muscle mass. We're losing about what, 3 to 5% per decade, right? Which is a real bummer if you don't stay on top of it. So it's really important to stay on top of it. And rowing works a variety of muscles all at once. So arms, back, shoulders, legs, core, you're getting a huge benefit by jumping on the rower and actually using it well. You're able to efficiently get through that, right? Cognitive decline, I think, is something that a lot of people don't think of. Proprioception, like where your body is in space, balance, falling and catching yourself. I think a lot of that, as we age, we start to lose that. The coolest thing about rowing, and kind of speaks to what you were just saying, is rowing is a sport that takes intention. You have to be present when you're rowing. You have to understand where your body is in the stroke to get the most out of it. So as you're moving, that mind-body connection is continually reinforced on every single stroke. So you get a chance to really lean into that, that cognitive function, right? And you reinforce that mind-body connection. I think, honestly, that is one of the biggest benefits of rowing for somebody who is aging.
Yeah. It just helps with a lot of different things. I'd say from like a joint perspective, like even if people are somewhat arthritic, because of the low impact, you're at least getting the synovial fluid moving and lubricating within the joints, which is going to typically, if you have any type of old injury, it may bother for a little bit, but once it loosens up, then oftentimes you feel better later. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think the full range of motion movement as well, right? So you're basically moving the joint in full range of motion in the sagittal place, front and back, right? Through every single stroke as well, which definitely helps with that.
Yeah, and I think too, you can kind of tailor it. So if you're a little tight, like maybe you don't go into as much flexion because you're not going as far forward. And what do you call? I'd call it a bar. I don't know what's it called that the seat glides on. Is there a name for that?
The slide.
The slide? Oh, okay. So yeah, the slide, I mean, it helps you go back and forth. So it's not just like you're constantly forcing it, but
totally.
See, I'm learning stuff. The slide. That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Sounds like the kid slide. So how can rowing help with things like posture and core strength? And well, we talked about back pain a little bit, and possibly even with back pain.
So your core is active the whole stroke, right? So just me sitting up a little taller than I was, my core is active, right? And so you're constantly, Michelle kind of mentioned the cognitive focus of that, but you're constantly having to sit up, which requires strength, right? And builds over time. If you're rowing correctly, for any rowers out there that have a machine, one simple kind of quick way to find out if your core is active fully is if your toes are like pulling on the straps when you hit the back of the stroke. If they're yanking on the straps, there's a good chance that your hip flexors are doing what your abdominals should be doing. And so there, if you're recruiting all of the right muscles, then your core is going to get a lot stronger through it. Also, because of the movement pattern, because of the hinging, you're lengthening the posterior chain, so the back side of the body, which should help also with posture, just loosening up some of those muscles that may be tight. Like if your hamstrings are tight, right? It's kind of creating a posterior pelvic tilt, which may not lead to good posture. And then just this simple thing where you're literally, squeezing through your rhomboids and opening up your chest, which helps with that as well. But I think the core element in strengthening your core really is the big thing there. Just a little side note. So I rode through my pregnancy. I rode through 38 weeks of pregnancy, and so you mentioning modifications, I'm like, oh yes, I definitely modified. But my doctor actually rode with me. So she was she would take my class and I would teach.
Oh.
I would do like 20 minutes of rowing 5 times a week. When I was very, very, very pregnant. But long story short, I ended up having a C-section. It was kind of an emergency thing. And my doctor was like amazed at how quickly I was able to recover from it. And I think so much of that, like really, truly, so much of that is the core strength that I had built through rowing. And I was able to come back and like within 12 to 14 weeks post baby, I was doing planks. I was doing a push-up, which is like unheard of because you're not supposed to exercise until 10 weeks post-op. So truly the rowing, like for my core, the rowing made a huge difference in that.
Sure. You have anything to add, Michelle?
I think just back pain. So a lot of lower back pain comes from tight hips, right? Tight hips, tight hamstrings, particularly the hip flexors. And I think moving through the full range of motion, understanding how to find that flexibility in the hamstrings from the finished position is going to really help that lower back pain.
Sure. So we talked about this a little bit with you saying you have a low heart rate, but what role does rowing play in heart health and overall endurance? Because I would say rowing can be aerobic or anaerobic. So meaning for the layperson, like lower intensity, more oxygen is used versus not as much oxygen. Your heart's really pounding.
Caley, you know what? I want you to expand on your pregnancy thing because that has a lot to do with heart health and overall endurance. But I'm just going to follow with Caley.
I mean, Mike, you kind of mentioned it, but it's really like it spans all of cardiovascular training, all of cardiovascular, anaerobic, aerobic, low intensity, high intensity. It's a matter of learning how to use it and, learning the right programming, which we do have in the book, for whatever your goal is, and then incorporating it into your routine, whether it's, mostly rowing or rowing is just kind of an add-on to what, strength training or whatever else you're doing. But I think first and foremost, it's a matter of like learning what the goal is and then being able to adjust the programming and how you're using the machine to that. You can build power on the machine. It's one of the few cardiovascular exercises that allows you to do that as well. You can row at low stroke rates with intensity, with light intensity. You can row at high stroke rates, right? So you have the kind of intensity factor coming from the flywheel that you're generating, and then you have the speed or the cadence factor, right? So rowing at a higher cadence, which is going to naturally elevate the heart rate. Rowing at a low cadence might lower the heart rate a little bit. It'll be more sustainable, more steady. However, if you start adding pressure at a low cadence, then your heart rate's going to elevate. But that's more sustainable than rowing at a high stroke rate for a long period of time, right? So, during my pregnancy, I had to take my work intensity down, right? So I was constantly in a talking pace throughout all of my rowing, which was like perfect. It was a perfect setup because I was coaching. So I was talking as I was rowing. We, in the gym we worked for, we would row and talk at the same time. So it was like, great. I was like constantly doing a talk test. I was always in a safe zone. But my clients that I was teaching, the class I was teaching, they were not able to talk, right? But we were still able to row together, and my intensity was just a little lower and theirs was just a little higher. So it's really about learning how to use the machine to get the intense, like to create the intensity or lack of intensity that you're looking for.
Sure. Do you have anything to add, Michelle?
I don't. No,
Okay.
I think.
All right, we'll go on to the next question. So, what advice would you give to someone who is over 50 who is brand new to rowing?
Get a good rowing coach. I think that's the number one thing to do. Find someone who can teach you how to use the machine. If you can find someone who knows how to use the machine, they understand the angles of the body, they understand how being at a proper angle with your torso compared to your legs and your knees over your ankles, that kind of stuff, and how you're using the angles of the body to get stronger, you're going to progress quicker. That said, resist the urge to go too quick too soon. I think a lot of people jump in, especially over 50, and they lack the mobility, they lack the core strength, they lack the proprioception, and so they jump in too quickly and they burn out or they get injured. So be patient, resist the urge to jump in too quickly, and resist the urge to zone out. The rower can be one of those things. I see it at the gym when I go to lift. I'll look around. You know, they have the 3 rowers kind of stuffed back into the corner, and you see older people usually on the rower, and they're just sort of zoned out and they're just kind of gliding back and forth, which I love, by the way. I love seeing that they're moving through their joints because that's really important, right? But I also would love to see them understand it just a little bit better, because if they did, they would get so much more out of that time spent. So get a good rowing coach, be patient with yourself, resist the urge to go too hard, too fast.
I see that same thing at my gym with the old people. Well, they're in the different areas, a couple in our gym, but is there, like, I know you talked a little bit that, and in your book you mentioned that there's different type of rowers. Do you guys have suggestions of, like, say you have variety, which ones people should try first? Or
Ultimately, most of the rowers, they're all the same in terms of how you use them, right? So it's the same form or technique on the rower. It's usually the difference is in the data that you're given and how it's viewed, and then what it feels like, right? So a water rower is going to feel and sound a little different than a Concept 2 rower. The Concept 2 rower is a fan-based, air-based rower. It's, you know, without sharing bias, I think, you know, that that the Concept 2 rower is what most on-water rowers use. Right. So, and there's a reason for that. Right. So I think it just depends. I think at the end of the day, any rower is better than no rower. So, and again, with the exception of maybe some kind of one-offs that are like, you know, arms only or some newer machines that are out there, like a rowing machine it's the same form on it, right? So you're going to get the same benefits from it. It's just going to feel a little bit different. Some might feel better for shorter workouts because maybe they're not as comfortable. And then others might be great for longer workouts, right? Concept 2, I could sit on that thing for a half marathon easily and it's super smooth, right? And that's the one that I'm most familiar with.
Have you done a half marathon on a rower?
Yeah.
Times.
Oh, God. I'll run it. I don't know if I want to roll that. I guess. So, in like a real, like a rowboat, are there slides? Because I know the seats move. Is that okay? I've never like seen one in person. I guess I don't know. I've just seen like in the Olympics and stuff.
Yeah, there's a slide there. You sort of, it's one of the things that when Caley was talking about the misconception of it being upper body, everybody thinks that you're like pulling that handle back, but you're, or that oar back.
Yeah.
You're sort of anchoring the blade in the water and pushing the boat under you. And so it causes like just a different connection. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, because I mean, normally the camera angle you see, they just look like they're swaying their back because you can't really see their legs. But yeah, it makes sense.
I do want to mention one thing now that we're speaking on the sport. I think too, it is good to recognize because visually you see people rowing on water in a very high, competitive Olympic nature, and maybe their back's a little bit more rounded, right? There's a difference between rowing for like maximum speed and effort, and like that you are a professional and that is your sport, versus rowing indoor for longevity, right? And for a healthier body and a healthier life. So I think that is definitely important to kind of recognize. And Michelle and I, when we wrote the book and teach clients, we're constantly, recognizing that difference of like, hey, we're rowing to get stronger. We're not necessarily rowing to be like the fastest person and going to the Olympics. So there's a slight difference in the form itself.
Yeah. So I know we talked about misconceptions earlier, but are there any other common mistakes a lot of beginners make when rowing? I know we talked about not using your legs enough. Do you want to kind of explain how people do it wrong?
Yeah, I think there's a handful. I think the most common, Michelle, correct me if you disagree on this. I think the most common is probably breaking the knees too early, which then kind of causes you to rush the slide. So that might have sounded like a different language. When you're coming in on the recovery, a lot of times people will bend the knees first before they've gotten the arms and body over. So they'll just kind of pull themselves back in, which does not set up your posterior, the backside of your body appropriately. It doesn't set up, it just wouldn't set you up for the strongest stroke or the safest stroke. With that, they're kind of pulling themselves in for the next stroke, where in reality, rowing is you're going faster on the way out, slower on the way in, which is like the opposite of what a lot of people think. They want to like rush back in for the next stroke. But it's honestly very similar to a deadlift. If you've ever done a deadlift, right? It's like you brace your core, you kind of fairly explosively, but with control, press up, right? Push up, bring the barbell up, bring your body straight, and then you slowly send the hips back and you slowly lower the barbell, right? So it's similar to that. I think, and actually the way that your legs and body and arms are moving is pretty similar, right? So you would never in a deadlift, if you had the barbell up and you were, full extension, you would never bend the knees first, right? You would always send the hips back first, slightly lower the barbell. And then as you're basically crossing over the knees, or as you need to bend the knees, then you would bend the knees. Same thing here. We release the arm first on the recovery end. We hinge the body forward to activate the hamstring to start to recruit those muscles. Then we bend the knees in. And that is, I definitely think, the most common error. And if you fix that, it actually fixes most of the other errors that you might see. And there's a handful of drills in the book. I was going to mention this earlier when Michelle was speaking on kind of somebody getting on the machine for the first time. How do you set them up? And she said, get a good coach. I think another thing is start with drills. So don't just start with like full stroke rowing. Start with drills, right? And the drills will teach proper form. You'll still get a workout while you're doing the drills. And we have, throughout the entire book, we have a series of different drills. The drills will teach you how to row. It'll also fix errors before they happen. So I think that's another thing. Michelle, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I 1000% agree with you. Bending the knees too soon on the recovery is the biggest thing. And it's one of the hardest things to fix. And it's something that you have to be super aware of where your handle is. Otherwise, you're going to do it. You're going to do it every single time. Because what you want to do is go from the back of the machine to the front of the machine, right? And the easiest way to do that is bending your knees. And so people just think instantly, if I bend my knees, I'll go back to the front. But again, like Caley said, you're not setting up the posterior chain to take most of the load on the way out, right? You're setting up your quads, you're setting up your hip flexors. You're starting to really get into a place where your drive is going to be less effective and potentially unsafe.
Sure. I'd imagine too, like the arm pulling, do people initiate that too soon?
Not as much, but they do. I think you see more of the upper body pulling. So on the way out, you'll see people sort of send their shoulders back first and then start to pull with their arms and press with their legs at the same time. But it's sequencing, right? So we always say it's legs, core, arms, or legs, body, arms on the way out, and then arms, body, legs on the way back. And any crack in that sequencing gives you a potential for injury and a potential to, I always say, you leak out power. So if you can keep your hips closed on the drive rather than opening the hips by swinging your upper body, you're not going to leak out power out of your hip flexors, right? You're going to keep all that power in your glutes and your hamstrings, and you're going to give yourself the potential to really drive a little bit harder. So yeah, sequencing and body position is, slouching is a big one too, for posture. But
I'm gonna be all up in my head the next time I try to row. Well, I'm just trying to think of like the old ways, and I was rowing. I'm like, I was probably doing half this stuff wrong. I'm pretty sure I probably bent at the knees first.
Just think it's like a deadlift high pull, but just don't pull so high.
Yeah, and then coming back, like I think I probably was like pulling with my quads and hip flexors, because you're always trying to get back. Well, I mean, it depends what you're doing, I suppose. If you're doing a fast versus slow, but still, yeah. Huh. Interesting. So are there any modifications for those with mobility limitations or any type of past injuries? I know we talked about pregnancy, but maybe a sore hip or back or shoulder.
yeah, absolutely. You can adjust the foot position. You can adjust your hips position, like the height of your hips. You can adjust your slide depth. You can adjust your damper setting. You can adjust your intensity. There's so many different ways to modify on the machine. Let's start with the foot stretcher. So the flex foot, which is where your feet strap in. If you drop the foot stretcher or lower the position of the foot stretcher, you're going to actually decrease or lessen the angle of your hip joint. So you're going to allow for somebody with tight hips, tight hamstrings, a tight lower back to get a little more depth in their stroke, to get more benefits from the stroke. Butt position, if you have somebody who's super tall or has really big feet and you can't drop the foot stretcher down any further, you can provide a seat cushion, a thick seat cushion that lifts their hips. And it essentially does the same thing. It lessens the angle of the hip joint. Somebody who has a tight hamstrings or maybe is carrying a little extra weight, you can just adjust your slide depth. So you can come in a half slide or a 3/4 slide rather than coming all the way to that vertical shin. Caley, what else do you have to add on that?
I think, the damper setting. So it depends on the machine that you're on. But I believe Water Rower has a way to kind of lower the water amount or raise it. But with Concept 2, there's a damper, which is like a little lever on the right side of the flywheel, which opens up for more air or less air. A lot of people, this is a misconception. A lot of people think that if you bump it to 10, then it's like naturally going to make your workout harder. And it's not necessarily the case. It essentially increases the drag of your boat, right? So it's going to make your boat feel heavier. It's not going to make your boat faster, right? So I think based on your body mass, right? If you're somebody coming in and you don't have a ton of body mass and you don't weigh a lot, and setting that damper lever to an appropriate level is good. If you're coming in and you're like a 250-pound former pro football player, like you might want to raise the damper a little bit higher, right? That's going to be a better setting for you. So the machine itself also sets, based off of your experience, your body, your conditioning level, right? All of that would matter and factor into that as well. Michelle, you mentioned the seat and the, adjusting the seat, your compression. So how far you come in at the catch or on the recovery. When I was pregnant, right, I had a large belly. And so I definitely adjusted my intensity, which I mentioned earlier. I lowered my foot plates, so my feet were a little bit lower. It opened up the hip angle a little bit. I did not come in as far, so I didn't compress as far. And then I also got a seat cushion that raised my hips up, and I would just put it right on top of the erg, right on top of the seat, and I would sit on it, and it just lifted my hips up, which opened up the hip angle even more. And I was like super comfortable through my pregnancy, through rowing. So, and I was not small either. I was like very large to the end of it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And one other thing we haven't really talked about, but it kind of goes into modifications. The rower is very adaptable as well. Like there's all kinds of things that you can get online now where it's like single arm rowing if you only have a use of one arm. There are people that, they'll basically detach the Concept 2, at least. I can't can't speak to anything else, but concept 2 for sure. You can detach the rower so the slide basically comes off and it's just the flywheel and the monitor part, and set it down. Usually people will get like weights, and there's a setup to where you can roll a wheelchair up to it, right? And you can do arms only rowing and still use the machine. So there's a lot of ways to adapt the rower, and the Concept 2 website has like so much information on that as well.
Sure. That's cool. I guess I didn't know I could do all that stuff.
They use it in the CrossFit games for like the adaptive CrossFit games.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting. So your book includes stretches and exercises in addition to rowing. So do you want to talk about why that is important?
Yes.
I'll take it.
Yeah. We both like jump.
There's many pages. This is like half the book. I feel I'm off camera.
Yeah.
Good. It's good.
Stuff.
Yeah. So for a couple of reasons. One, there's exercises that you can do off the rower that will make you stronger on the rower, right? And then on the contrary, there's exercises that move your body in a way that the rower doesn't, right? So there's, it's important to move in all planes of motion, to move unilaterally, contralaterally. The rower is bilateral. Your arms and your legs, left and right, are moving at the same speed, same direction. We're in forward and back, we're in the sagittal plane. So I think number one is just like moving your body differently. That's going to translate better to life. So it'll take all those amazing benefits from the rower and then just make it more well-rounded. And then also I think from a flexibility and mobility standpoint, we've kind of mentioned it, but if you can lengthen out your muscles to sit and get in a better position on the rower, then you're going to recruit more muscles, right? You're going to get more out of it. And so I think that there's things that you can do off the erg or off the rower that will help speed up that process a little bit, right? If you have tight hamstrings, tight glutes, tight hips, then yeah, like rowing at first might not be that comfortable. But if you can, work to loosen all of that up off the erg and then row with proper form on the erg, you're going to see improvements. And all of a sudden 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks later, it's not going to be so uncomfortable, right? You're going to start to sit up a little taller. You're going to start to be able to hinge a little bit further. You're going to start to really be able to sit on your sits bones and not back on your tailbone, right? And so I think there's things that rowing does that, but you can enhance it and just make your regimen, your workout regimen more well-rounded with off-erg stuff.
And you can make it more enjoyable, right? Because the more mobility you find, and the more flexibility you find, the more comfortable your body is. Like things like good mornings, a runner's lunge to open up the hips, world's greatest stretch, hip rotations. Hip rotations are amazing because I don't think we realize that we don't really move our hips, in that full range of motion very often. Caley had mentioned complementing and supplementing exercises. Complementing exercises would be things like squats, deadlifts, lunges, planks, kettlebell swings. Those are things that really reinforce the movement pattern of the rower. The supplemental exercises would be things that really enhance the performance by giving you that full body. That would be like lateral movements or rotational movements. So Russian twists, side lunges, any push movement, because on the rower, you're pushing with your legs, but your upper body push movements have to be addressed off the rower. Things like push-ups, chest press, overhead presses. I think that just addresses any imbalance that you might get by just rowing. That's why it's so important to keep the body balanced.
Just to add one more thing. Sorry, Mike. I think
You're fine.
Exercises that improve your stability, like stability in the joints. So like single leg deadlifts, even if you're holding on to something, right? Or if your foot's back in a kickstand, right? Even if it's a modified version, things where you're just balancing on one leg or maybe lifting a knee up. Those are going to be great, especially for the wiser demographic that's been around on Earth a little longer. Especially for those people that are using the rower in that way, it's going to be important just to, make sure that balance is good.
So how would someone structure a rowing workout? And I have 3 categories. I'm assuming they kind of be different, but one would be more strength, one would be more endurance, and the other one would be for just basic longevity.
Caley, why don't you do strength?
Yeah. So, Mike, just to clarify, are you thinking like primarily rowing workout?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, obviously you can combine it with strength training, but if you have the rower and you're looking to use it to improve your strength or increase your strength, I would say learning to row at low stroke rates with intensity. So, and then potentially playing around with the damper setting as well. So making your boat a little bit heavier, right? Increasing the drag. But really first rowing with proper form, and we're going to sound like a broken record, but like thousands of people we've trained and taught, and it's the number one thing is like, you have to know how to use the machine to actually benefit from the machine, right? So I think rowing in a way that recruits the muscles to actually build strength is huge, especially with core strength, and then activating your legs properly. But I think then programming wise, working at low stroke rates with high power. So being able to generate a lot of intensity at low stroke rates. It's kind of like if you were to do like a 5-rep max deadlift instead of doing, 100 reps at a really light weight, right? It's the same idea there where you would do, even just like you could do every minute on the minute, 10 powerful strokes and then go light row, but the powerful stroke should be at a low cadence. So you're really driving hard through the stroke as opposed to rowing fast to get your boat faster, to get the wattage up. So I think that's probably number one. Michelle, do you have anything to add to strength?
No, I think that's fantastic. That's exactly what I would have said.
So how about endurance?
Increase the volume. Just get on the rower for longer periods of time. So consistency, one stroke after the next should feel exactly the same. And you get really, really good at that. When I first started to learn how to row, my coach told me, when I first started to learn how to row indoors, my coach told me I'm a huge hockey fan. He said, when you sit and watch the hockey game, first period, row at 20 strokes a minute. Take a break during intermission. Second period, row at 22 strokes a minute. Take a break at intermission. Third period, row at 24 strokes a minute. Go back and look at your numbers and see how consistent you were through your splits. So that's learning how to row with consistency. You have a chance to get into the meditative side of rowing, and you really learn ratio and rhythm of the stroke. That's where you start to really tap into those cardiovascular benefits, right? Because you're able to calm your heart rate, you're able to control your breathing, and you can go for longer periods of time. So increase your volume, stay consistent with your rate.
How long are hockey periods? That seems like a long time. What is it?
They're only 20. Well, they can be a little longer. They're 20 minutes, but with penalties and stuff like that.
Sure.
So
that much rowing? Jeez.
If you're gonna be good at something, you have to practice it, right?
I guess at least you have something to watch.
It's like your long runs for your.
Yeah, I suppose I'm outside though. At least
I'm guilty of watching Netflix while I row.
Yeah, if I'm on indoor stuff, I normally watch something. I get too bored otherwise. So a lot of people like to track their progress, and obviously you could do that through distance total or your time. Are there other ways to do it? Maybe kind of how you mentioned, like how many rows can you get within a certain amount of time? Are there any other suggestions you would have?
I think your force curves. So without getting too technical, but there's on the concept to rower, it measures how basically how what your drive looks like, right? And if you're losing, Michelle mentioned like leaking power, right? Or leaking something. If you're not rowing properly, it's going to tell you. It's basically telling you it's your force curve throughout your drive part of your stroke. So it's going to tell you if you have a little glitch, right? If you're pulling too much with your arms, or if you're inconsistent, right? If it looks different every single stroke. So I think that's one is learning to row properly to create consistency and efficiency in your stroke, every stroke. And it's a really nice visual to have as well. You just want this like nice little haystack as you're rowing. But I think probably the best would be to take time and distance and dive a little deeper. So in the theme of consistency, like let's say you do a 5,000 meter row for time, and you're using that as a benchmark to see if you can get a little faster, right? Or to see if you can improve your speed and your endurance. So you would do it. And I would also encourage people to write down, and on the Concept 2 rower, if you program it in, it'll tell you, hey, for the first 1,000 meters, you were at this average split or speed, and you were at this stroke rate on average. For the second 1,000 meters, like you can break it down just like you would if you were running 5 miles, right? You'd be able to know what you did on mile 1, mile 2, mile 3, mile 4, mile 5. And then what I would do is, you can obviously row 5,000 meters again and try to get a faster time. That's one way. But then also row it again, maybe try to get a faster time, but lower your stroke rates, right? Or create more consistency in your stroke rates. So if you were to compare it to running again, it would be like, okay, if I'm doing, a 5-mile race and my 4th mile is like, a minute slower than everything else, well, I need to improve that 4th mile. So how do I create more consistency, get a little bit of speed there? It's same thing, right? So I think diving a little deeper into the consistency and using the data to do that, and then say, okay, can I make my boat go the same speed, get there in the same amount of time, but do less strokes, right? Can I make every stroke like matter a little bit more, go a little farther? So let's say I do a 5K row and it takes me 25 minutes and I'm averaging 27 strokes per minute or 28 strokes per minute. I'm working pretty hard, right? What if in 6 months I could do a 5K row at 25 minutes at 22 strokes per minute, right? That's like, okay, that's awesome. Now I'm just kind of like cruising, right, to get there, and I'm generating, and I've got more strength, and I can breathe throughout it. And then if I do it again at 28 strokes per minute, all of a sudden I dropped off a minute on my time, right? So I think Mike, just diving deeper into the data and what that actually means, and looking at splits just like you would if you were running or cycling.
Sure. Can those concepts like connect through Bluetooth devices or no?
Yeah.
Oh.
So Erg Data is an app that Concept 2 has that connects right in, and you can see all of your splits in real time and everything. And then you can also connect a heart rate monitor as well.
Sure. You said Netflix and rowing, and it reminded me of House of Cards. You guys ever watch that? Remember when the president would be stressed, he'd just go row?
Do not learn your form from that show.
Well, he also would smoke afterwards, so but I don't think he had probably a good heart rate.
Yeah, he did not have a good coach.
So my last question is, many people struggle with consistency. What tips do you have for making rowing a long-term habit?
Michelle, you want to take it?
For me, I'm just going to go with the intrinsic motivator, because I think that that's the one thing that a lot of people struggle with. External motivation is easy. You can find groups, you can find rowing studios, you can find group fitness, friends, logbook. The intrinsic motivators are hard, right? When you sit down on the machine, how do you push yourself to go harder? I think you have to find what feeds you. If you're an endurance athlete or if you are a performance athlete, you're going to feel a little differently about what you're doing than if you are just somebody who's using the rower for general fitness, right? So if you're somebody using the rower for general fitness, understand why you're there and the gains that you're actually getting. I don't row the physical side of it is all a great, it's all a great byproduct. But I row so that I am heart healthy, and I can, like, my nephews are 17 and 19. 2 of my nephews are 17 and 19. I want to go to the gym and lift weights with them, right? I want to be able to hang when I do that. So my intrinsic motivator is, as I get older, push what makes me happy. And that's spending time with my nephews, right? I think that's the best way to motivate yourself. And it keeps me going back more and more and more. External motivators, there's so many things that can externally motivate you, right? I think find a good rowing community. If you can find a solid rowing community that keeps you coming in over and over again, you're going to be consistent. Rowing is a practice sport, which means the more you do it, the better you get at it if you're doing it properly. And if you find a rowing studio that, is able to provide that for you, you're able to get that direction from the coach, but you're also able to get the support from the community. You're getting that external motivation as well.
Do you have anything to add, Caley?
I'll just say what really helped me during COVID, because I'm a fast twitch muscle fiber. I like sprinting. I like short workouts that don't last long. I maybe have some sort of undiagnosed ADD. I don't know, but I just have a really hard time focusing and staying motivated. So something that helped me is, if I have like something visual to look at, so there's all kinds of apps and things that you can add on to the machine that'll be like video workouts, or Concept 2, actually, if you go on their logbook website, they have challenges. So that totally got me through COVID, was the Concept 2 challenges, where it's like, row 100,000 meters in the month of January and your score goes up, or join this team and try to get this team to row X amount of meters, or, do all of your benchmark workouts and see where you stack up against the team. That like totally helps motivate me. And Michelle kind of mentioned, like, find your community. Maybe that's an online community if you don't have anything near you. There's tons of resources out there for that. And again, Concept 2 does challenges. Anybody can join them. And it's just like a good way to stay on it. Cause it was like, in COVID, I'm like, man, every week I have to do a different benchmark. So I'm like, I don't want to stink, right? I want to do a good 5K. So I need to practice.
Sure. Yeah, I like external motivators. I normally sign up for some type of race each year just to, otherwise it's just like, why am I running? Like, you just kind of get sick of it. But so the book is called Indoor Rowing. You can find it on Amazon and at Human Kinetics. Are there other places that have this available? Or those are primary too?
Those are the primary.
Okay. Where can people find you two online?
I'm on Instagram. My handle is MP Michelle Parolini, Fit FIT in the 412. MP Fit in the 412.
I'm on Instagram as well, and it's just at Caley-Crawford.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope people learned a lot. I certainly learned. I got the slide down. I got that term down. The dampener, is that the other one?
Damper.
Dang it. Damper. I was close.
Damper. Uh-huh.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. Do you have any last remarks you'd like to make?
Thanks for having us. Get on the rower. And if you want to do a private coaching session, hit me up. I'm happy to do a little Zoom call with you and get your form on point.